presentational access has these features that I listed. It has this indexicality. You see things as occurring right here and now. What is it then that is in common between the veridical experience and the hallucination? I hope it's obvious. They have exactly the same conditions of satisfaction. Even if I'm having a hallucination right now, all the same, I know what it's a hallucination of, which is to say, I know what the conditions of satisfaction are. I know how things seem to me, because that's what the notion of condition of satisfaction is supposed to capture, how things seem to me. And I'm suggesting then that naive realism can be rescued from our 300, 350, 400-year-old urge to reject it. It is rescued by seeing that a correct account of the intentionality of visual experience will enable us to explain how can it be both the case that we see objects and states of affairs in the world, and at the same time recognize that, like all intentionality, they're subject to mistake. They're subject to various kinds of, in this case, illusions, delusions, perceptual inadequacies of various kinds, and the philosopher's favorite, hallucinations. And on that point, I'll stop and open this up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. We have plenty of time for discussion, so please come with questions, objections, or comments.
Yeah.
You promised to get back to Hume and his
Oh yeah, Hume. Okay, I promised and then I forgot all about it. But okay. Hume says that if you're tempted to naive realism, you think you see the real world. Well, says Hume, there's a simple refutation. If you push one eyeball, then on the naive realist assumption, you'd have to assume the world doubled. The size of the audience doubled, because where before I saw one of you, I now see two of you. Now, I think that's an extremely dumb conception of naive realism. What the naive realist says is that in the normal case, you see an object, and in the hallucination case, so let me show you what all these pictures look like. Here's the normal case where you just see an object. What happens when you push one eyeball is this. You have two visual experiences, but only one object. So it doesn't refute. You see, Hume assumes the naive realist would have to maintain that the number of people in the room doubled if I saw everybody double. But that's not so. The naive realist doesn't have to assume that. What the naive realist assumes is that I can have two different experiences of one object. And in fact, if I had three eyes, I could have three experiences. This is just a fact about binocular vision. By unfocusing your eyes, you can get different experiences. And indeed, there's an old argument for the sense data view that goes as follows. If you look at the back of the room and hold up your finger, you see your finger double. Now comes the fatal move. What do you see two of when you see your finger double? And the idea is, well, it can't be two fingers. Watch. See, only one. Furthermore, I can, make the two coalesce, you see, into just one. So the story goes, well then, the naive realist would be unable to account for that. I think it's rather easy for the naive realist to account for it. Namely, binocular vision enables us to focus on different things. And if you focus on the back of the room, then you will see your finger double. But let's repeat the question. When you see your finger double, what do you see two of? And the answer is nothing. You see one finger and you see it double. The right way to represent it is this. And the argument I just gave you illustrates the fallacy that I mentioned earlier, the fallacy of confusing the constitutive sense of aware of, see of, conscious of, with the intentional sense. In the constitutive sense, my double vision is a matter of having two experiences. I have two experiences of the finger when I see it double. But in the intentionalistic sense, I'm not seeing two fingers. I'm seeing one finger and seeing it double. That is to say, the conditions of satisfaction, if I take them to be presenting me with two fingers are not satisfied. There's only one finger there. Anyway, Hume was living on the legacy of Locke and Berkeley, not to mention Descartes, and he assumed that Berkeley had refuted naive realism. Berkeley's greatest efforts were the refutation of naive realism, and that's what his principles on the three dialogues is about, is refuting naive realism. So Hume thought, well, these guys have already refuted naive realism, I'm going to assume it's false, that all we can ever perceive are our own impressions. And then he says, but if you are tempted to it, in my edition, I haven't looked at it since I was an undergraduate, but I think it's about page 210 of the Selby Big edition. He says, if you're tempted to this naive view, I forget the words he used for it, but it's clear he's attacking naive realism. He said, push your eyeball. And he says the naive realist would have to assume the world doubled. But the naive realist, unless he's very stupid, doesn't. At the back, yeah.
How do I know, just following up on that,
Sorry?
how do I know that I see the same finger twice?
Yeah.
And
Well,
not two
sorry,
fingers?
go ahead. Okay. There are various tests. I mean, if I really have doubts, my God, maybe I've got 6 fingers instead of 5. No, I can check it out. I mean, there are all sorts of standard tests.
Sure, I'm asking generally.
Yeah.
Is there a general
Now,
method?
you see, this is our general philosophical tradition says, first you've got to prove that knowledge is possible at all. You see, you've got to refute. And then come the standard questions. How do you know that you're not being deceived by an evil demon? You all recognize that, that's Descartes. Or nowadays, it's how do you know you're not a brain in a vat? And there's a perfectly dreadful movie called The Matrix. I don't know if but it's popular among. The reason it's dreadful is it proceeds on a false premise. The premise of the movie is that what is being photographed couldn't be photographed because it's not actually occurring, right? That is, if you and I are both having shared hallucinations and I'm lying in my bed and you're lying in your bed, all a photographer can take a picture of is you lying in bed and me lying in bed. There isn't any event to be photographed. But the idea is that, well, in the Matrix, they all have this experience which is as if they were having normal life because their brain is stimulated in the right way. And the answer, then the question is supposed to be, well, how do you know that you're not in that experience? Or how do you know that you're not a brain in a vat? And so on with all of the traditional forms of skepticism. And then, of course, on their own terms, on its own terms, the skeptic can never be adequately answered because all skeptical arguments have the same form, namely, you could be having exactly these experiences and still be radically mistaken. Or you could be having any experiences and still be radically mistaken. So the mistake, I think, is to suppose what you've got to do is show that there's something internal to the experience. This is what Descartes tried to do. Show there's something internal to the experience that guarantees its validity, some clear and distinct character, to use the Cartesian jargon, to the experience itself when I'm actually seeing the object, which is lacking here when it's more fuzzy and less clear and less distinct. That's a mistake. And the mistake is to suppose that if knowledge is valid, then there must be some feature of the inner perceptual experience that guarantees its validity. But of course, there couldn't be. Remember, on the account that I'm giving you, in any perceptual situation, there are 2 things going on. There's the real world, and there's the conscious experience of the real world that's going on in your head. And if the question is, what feature of the conscious experience guarantees, just in virtue of the structural feature of the conscious experience, that it adequately presents the real world? There is no such feature. I would start differently. If you're interested in how is knowledge possible at all, start with the biologically simple cases. How does the baby know that it's actually confronting another human being and not a stone or a piece of furniture? And then you have an interesting question in the psychology of infant development. How does the baby learn to make those distinctions? But the philosophical tradition gives us a wrong question and a wrong answer. The question is, what are the intrusive